Hello there.
Hi.
Hey,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm good. This is so weird because you're coming out of that speaker and not into this.
Oh,
Well, let me check my Bluetooth. Can you hold on a
yeah,
second? And
sure.
I'm trying to figure out how to. I turned my Bluetooth on, and now it's just going to that speaker. So let me turn this off. Disconnect. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am with Dr. Claudia Luiz. She's a psychoanalyst on the East Coast. She has a book called The Making of a Psychoanalyst. Highly recommend. It's so interesting. It's such a good read, both from a patient perspective as well as from a medical professional perspective. So Claudia, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Claudia Luiz, and I am a psychoanalyst. And what that means is that I'm interested in the parts of our mind that we don't know yet. So my job is to help people get connected to parts of themselves that are free-floating inside but haven't reached consciousness yet. And I'm going to be lending that perspective to my life as a puddle, is what I call it. My life as a puddle conundrum.
Yes. So for those of us who have hyperhidrosis, today's topic that I'd like to talk about is hyperhidrosis and mental health. A lot of people who have excessive sweating suffer from anxiety and depression, and it can be very debilitating for people. I often say that we're not sweating because we're nervous, but we're nervous because we're sweating, and there's a big difference there. So what kind of practical tips or advice would you have for people who have anxiety and depression, whether it's caused by hyperhidrosis or from something else?
Well, you know, from my perspective as a psychoanalyst, anxiety is not a primary emotion. It's a reaction to something that's unconscious. So we have anxiety basically because we are not comfortable with ourselves. You're not in a good, stable relationship with yourself, and you're kind of at war with yourself. Now, anytime your body betrays you, naturally, you're going to be in a struggle with yourself. Why? Because you don't want to have this happening, and yet it's outside your control. So it's really easy when you're dealing with an evil force outside yourself, but when that evil force is inside yourself, it's very, very agonizingly disturbing. And for many, many moments in time, because there are times when you can surrender to whatever's happening inside your bodies, and other times when you really can't and you don't want to and you're just mad. And when you have anxiety, what it means is that you're having something which is clinically known in my circles as intrapsychic conflict. You're at war with yourself. Now, why would you be at war with yourself? Well, the answer to that is because you are brave and because you are good. And let me explain what happens to you when you're brave and good. When you're brave and good, you really want to put your best foot forward in a kind way. So you do that with your conscious mind. For example, you will feel ashamed of yourself. Believe it or not, being ashamed of yourself is a way of being brave and good, because it means you don't want to put forward the foot of yourself that is vulnerable and hurting and that you don't want and that disturbs you. So believe it or not, shame is actually an offshoot of wanting to put your best foot forward, because with shame, you always have in your mind the hope of being better. So shame is actually a function of being brave and good, which is strange, right? Because like, you shouldn't feel ashamed of yourself. But if you surrender to something that's vulnerable inside of yourself, then you have grief. So the opposite of shame, which is the courage, the braveness, is grief, which is why I love my life as a puddle, because it says that in some way you are okay with crying. So already, and it's cute, so already you know you're going to have a good experience with this advocate, with this person who is going to be talking about it. And the intrapsychic conflict is that if you surrender to this body betrayal, to what your body is doing, which is what you need to do, not to have anxiety, you could get really depressed. Where's the hope going to come from? That you can hide it, that you can be better, that you are not this person. So there you have intrapsychic conflict, and it's very difficult when you're in the world being brave and good to know how disappointed you are, how mad you are, and what is worse than being mad at your own body, at your own self, or your genetic disposition. That's really hard. So we push away grief, we push away rage as we are good and brave, because who wants to be angry? That's not a way to be good. And who wants to be depressed? That's not a way to be brave and courageous. So then we have anxiety.
Right. I'm so glad you brought up the word shame, because that's actually one of the questions I was going to bring up as well. So that's kind of a nice segue into it.
Good.
I've got a couple of notes here from your book on page 23. When you're talking about your patient, Katrina, you say, when you can speak your story, it no longer scares you. So being able to come out of that shame and finally not being afraid to say, you know, I sweat a lot. I have a medical condition that's not necessarily my fault, and I'm tired of hiding from it. And that's kind of what happened with me when I started my advocacy work. You know, I finally decided, you know, it's not just me out here who's suffering. Maybe I can turn my mess into my message and help other people along the way. And there's another quote here on page 32. We are confronted over and over with the fact that as a species, we construct realities that are often illusory. Our patients, as we ceaselessly resolve our own resistances to being in the room with them, always take us to new levels of understanding about our own consciousness, about our own distorted ways of seeing the world and seeing ourselves, so that we too can flower and blossom to new states of consciousness in which we can enjoy being in our own skin and come on our own journey to feeling attractive, competent, intelligent, or alive. So back to the shame, 365 million people worldwide have hyperhidrosis. That's 5% of the global population. And I think hyperhidrosis is underdiagnosed and undertreated largely in part because of that shame aspect. People are ashamed of the skin they're in, and they're not comfortable going to the doctor and saying, you know, why do I have such bad sweating? So how do we kind of move through that shame, and in order to kind of advocate for ourselves and seek out treatments, even knowing that maybe we won't find a cure?
I think there are three things that have to happen, Maria. The first is for people to hook up with people like you, to find support, because, you know, shame is very alienating. You're very lonely. And part of shame is feeling that, you know, so when you realize how many people have this, that's very strengthening, and you are not alone. So the first thing that you should do is join the support groups, hook up with leaders who have done work with their shame and are advocates and can be our voice. I think that the second thing that you have to do is embrace your shame and understand that it's a function of being brave and good. And not try to get rid of it, because then you're going to be at war with yourself. But kind of understand what your mind is doing and how difficult this is, and that's why it's there. You can't, the synapses that fire together wire together. Now that we know that we don't have to waste time pretending we don't have these feelings, but we can interpret them differently. So shame is courage and good.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing that you want to do is manage anxiety with CBT and meditation, just symptom management. And finally, you want to come to someone like me and do the deeper work of getting comfortable with whatever you discover this means to you, whether it's grief, whether it's rage. You know, this is an opportunity to get a little bit enlightened as to what it is that's hard to tolerate, because the more disturbed you are by the body betrayal, let's call it, the more disturbed you are by your shame, the more disturbed you are by grief, the greater a chance once you start speaking these truths, I'm looking at the sign behind your head, to be fully authentic. And there's nothing more authentic than understanding what it is that you're really allergic to. Once you can tolerate the unspeakable and the unthinkable inside yourself, and you can tolerate it in other people, you have a path to wisdom. And that's where you can use your body betrayal, use your life as a puddle for growth. You know, in Australia, in the, the nether regions, when everything dries up and it's desert land, all life starts with the first puddle.
Interesting.
That's where tadpoles come, things come in, and the entire desert starts to teem with life and fullness and depth and flora and fauna from that puddle.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. Now, for someone who's thinking about going to a therapist to kind of work through some of this stuff, a lot of times we're worried about the emotions that might come up in a therapy session. So how do you kind of guide your patients through feeling those difficult emotions so that they can either move past them or accept them or be with them?
Well, there's two kinds of therapy that you can enter into. Some forms of therapy will protect you from those emotions and take you out of them. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. There is now EMDR. If you've been traumatized with a shameful situation, you can do some EMDR and pretty much experience some symptom relief. So if you're in a current of intense emotion, you want to just look for symptom relief, and that's the therapy you should look for. Once you feel stable and strong and you're able to look at your shame and you want to enter into a deeper relationship with yourself and maybe resolve that shame once and for all, then you're ready for a more psychoanalytic experience. And psychoanalysts will not try to take your feelings away from you. They will be with you in the feelings, normalizing the feelings. When you're with somebody who is like, imagine a whitewater guide. Have you ever been whitewater rafting?
No, I haven't.
Well, basically you're in these whitewaters and you need a guide, and the guide can kind of steer the boat so that you feel safe. And if you're with a good practitioner who's working with the unconscious and is used to steering the boat with very, very powerful currents of emotion, then you'll learn through that person how to be with those emotions too. And then you can start to look into what may still be unconscious on the spectrum of grief or on the spectrum of rage.
Okay. Excellent info. We've known each other for 8 years now, and you kind of watched me go through this advocacy journey and just dealing with, so many different things that life has thrown my way. So, I'd like to just kind of turn it over to you and anything else that you might like to talk about as far as advocacy or, journeys through life, anything that comes up for you.
Well, I have been wanting to talk to you more deeply, and I'm so happy that we're here together. And I wondered how you've been able to turn this into such a source for optimism and depth and good in yourself. And I think it would be inspiring for listeners to learn what it's done for you
Mm-hmm.
to advocate and to.
Yeah, I think for me, the kind of the catalyst that started me on this advocacy journey happened almost 10 years ago when I became a patient volunteer and I had Botox injections in my hands to hopefully treat my hyperhidrosis. And that was the first time that I walked into a room and I didn't have to apologize for myself and the way that my body behaved. The physician, the dermatologist in the room, they understood my condition. They understood what I was going through. They shook my hand and they touched my sweaty feet, and they didn't shrink back in disgust, because typically the first impression when you meet someone new is a handshake. Well, when you're reaching across the aisle with a sweaty hand, that's your first impression. And a lot of people think, oh, she must be nervous, or she's not confident, or she's this, or she's that. And then I've actually had
Negative.
negative connotations. And so I've had people shake my hand and then wipe their hand on their pants immediately afterward. And that just made me feel horrible inside. So that day when I was a patient,
almost like you're being wiped off. It feels
exactly.
like they want to be wiped of you.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to wipe me away. And so that was the first time that I didn't have to apologize for who I was. And I left that day and I just felt like there was this calling, like the universe was whispering in my ear, and the voice would not stop. And so I felt like, well, maybe people would want to hear my story. Maybe I could help them in some way. And so I launched my blog. I had no idea what I was doing when I first started, how to run a website and how to run social media, but you figure it out as you go and you just keep doing the next right thing. And now, almost 10 years later, my blog reaches people all over the world, which has been so rewarding. And then about 2 years ago, I decided, this doesn't have to just be about me anymore. I can grow my puddle of awareness and my puddle of support. And now I accept guest posts on my blog. So I've got stories from England and Nairobi, Kenya, the Philippines, Canada, several people in the United States. So it's just been really rewarding.
Talk about consciousness expansion. So this is what, and I remember it was so exciting when you were selected to go on the Oprah tour.
Yeah.
And I thought, look where it can lead to be who you are, no matter what's happening, to have so much. And, that's kind of what Oprah is all about, opening yourself up to being vulnerable. She's such an icon for that. And of course, seeing a person like you, was such a natural fit. But that was really, that must have been so much fun.
It was amazing. This was about 3 years ago that I was an Oprah Magazine insider, and they accepted applications nationwide, and over 1,000 people applied, and then they selected 50 people. So I was one of 50 women nationwide to become an ambassador for the magazine. And I ended up going on a cruise to Alaska, and I was a model in a Chico's fashion show, which someone with hyperhidrosis, that was going to be what I thought would be my worst nightmare. But I kept telling myself, for this year that I'm with Oprah Magazine, everything that comes my way, I'm going to say yes, no matter what. And if I fail at it, then I fail, but at least I can say I've tried. And I went through the entire fashion show without sweating. It was a Christmas miracle. So I stood on stage in front of hundreds of people modeling clothes, and it gave me so much more confidence. And this whole advocacy journey has really helped me grow my confidence. I was brave and I was vulnerable, and I put myself out there and I started talking about my story because I was tired of hiding my sweaty secret. It's very draining when you feel like you can't fully show up as yourself and fully show up to an event or even family gatherings, But the more you talk about it, the better it gets, even if there's never a cure, because I don't want to have expectations of having a cure for hyperhidrosis, because then if there's never a cure found, I'm never going to be happy. So I have to put it on myself to really do that deep inner work in order to find a happy place for myself.
Yes, and what I love about Alaska is that this is a journey, literally.
Yeah.
And that, we're in an epoch, as difficult as this time is, with the pandemic and fires raging everywhere. But, on another level, people are much more honest.
Yes.
It is a good time to be honest and vulnerable, because there is so much more community around mental health issues. And let me tell you, this is making my job so much easier that I'm not even feeling a stigma around going to therapy. It's really becoming something that is to be celebrated, and it's a fantastic luxury, but also a necessity, because we pass down shame just the way that we pass down stuff that happens to our body. And the more that how we feel, we're learning now, affects our DNA.
Right.
And gets passed down. So really a way to change the world is to start to understand our unconscious relationship to really difficult feelings that don't have words like anger, anxiety, depression, feelings that fill us with dread and agitation that disturb us. And when we get to that level of talking, and it's not just we're applying this word and we're applying that word, and it's all up here in our intellectual mind, but we can enter into and start to find new words for these kinds of more complex and difficult and scary and dark feelings.
Yeah.
That, getting more comfortable with all that, it really changes our DNA. And then we can have all kinds of tragedies in our life, because who doesn't?
Right.
Nobody doesn't have a tragedy that creates a feeling of I better be brave and good, and therefore I'm going to be ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
Vulnerability is hard. Who doesn't have that in their life? So to dredge up and start to understand what it means to us personally to be not perfect in some way, not to have a perfect life, a perfect spouse, a perfect job, a perfect past, a perfect body, perfect job, everything. We always naturally want everything to look and be perfect. That's how we're hardwired.
Right.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
A double-edged sword.
Now you talked about things that fire together, wire together. So sometimes I'll find myself in kind of what I call a sweaty inner monologue. So I'll be going to an event or going to a job interview, for example. And so I have these thoughts going through my head, worried about my hyperhidrosis and sweating and appearing nervous and this, that, and the other. So how do I get my brain to rewire so that I'm firing in a more healthy way?
Well, you see, that is a moment where you really have to be your most brave and good, because you're in an interview. So naturally, the shame is going to come down hard because you want to be perfect. And you've got this thing going on that is less than perfect. So that's where you're really going to see the anxiety. And you just have to know that. You just have to know your brain is going to do that when you most need to be brave and good. This is not a time for you to feel vulnerable and want to cry and want to feel really sad and blessed. It's not. It's a time for you to be your best. So, the two kind of don't go together. So if you can anticipate and know that you will be visited by the shame, it's going to be there. Now, if you buy into it, buying into the shame means that you feel inadequate. You're not going to perform well in that moment. Being judged is difficult. I think one of the reasons you had so much fun with on the Alaska experience is that you are rewarded for being authentic.
Right.
So there's going to be, that gives you serotonin to feel proud. Serotonin is a very, very powerful chemical, very stabilizing. It lives in our gut. And a lot of times when we don't have the job we want and we're working towards something, but we're not there yet, we don't have a lot of serotonin. And then we feel unstable.
Right.
And that's natural, it's normal. And if you are not having times in your life when you are feeling unstable, you are not growing.
Exactly.
You cannot grow and reach higher levels without feeling. Now, how do you deal with feeling unstable? That's a matter of how good a relationship you're going to work on having with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you get to know yourself and the feelings you're allergic to and the feelings that are intolerable, I've got to get rid of this feeling, I've got to get rid of this feeling. That's an intolerable feeling. Then you have to defend against it. You defend against a feeling with anxiety, with dopamine. When you don't have enough serotonin, you need dopamine, and that's exhausting and hard on the body. You get that through food, you get it through drugs, you get it through alcohol, you get it through computer games, whatever gives you that little pick-me-up. When there isn't enough serotonin, you can always expect that you're going to want more and more dopamine.
Right.
It's hard to be human.
It is hard. That also makes me think about, growing up and having hyperhidrosis and not knowing that it's a recognized medical condition. So how would you kind of advise parents to help their children navigate life with hyperhidrosis as a child?
Well, of course, the more you normalize anything for your children, whether it's something that's happening in their bodies or something that's happening that's hard to cope with outside their bodies. And there is no child anywhere that when you get to know that child doesn't have something that's bothering them. Because life is hard. Maybe it's a kid at school, maybe it's a feeling of, every child has something that they are growing into or growing away from. Right. So if you can get your child to express, if you have a good enough, we want our children to look and be perfect. It's very scary when our children are unstable.
Yeah. And
so a lot of times we shy away from that because it's too painful and we overlook what's really going on. And the more educated we become in dealing with feelings, the more we can learn what it is. Because some children may have hypohidrosis and be fine with it. Well, It is what it is. And other children may be very disturbed by it. You don't know until you explore with your child what their attitude is. So if you come in with your own attitude, oh, you're fine, and your kid is already fine, then the kid is going to be like, should I be anxious about this? Should I be ashamed of this? So, and on the other hand, if you ignore it, you're fine, and you're not listening to the fact that your child is struggling with shame, you can overlook the child. So what is the answer to not overlooking the child? Is to get comfortable with feelings, to find that place inside yourself that's agitated, that has dread, that has anxiety, that feels really sad. And that is your path. Those feelings are your path to getting more comfortable and having a really good relationship with yourself. Those are the feelings you want to bring to a deeper therapy experience.
Right. So follow the feelings and don't be afraid to follow those feelings. Or you can be afraid, but still follow them anyway.
If you're too afraid, then first you have to get stable with CBT, meditation, mindfulness, and support and education. Use the top of your mind, because otherwise you'll really get derailed. When you have enough strength and curiosity, when you have the luxury to be curious about, why do I feel so bad? Why can't I feel more stable? Then you have a really good question to pursue. And you'll learn stuff about your family, you'll learn stuff about your siblings, you'll learn stuff about your past, about how you've been built. And then you can be in the best authentic relationship with yourself ever, because you'll have a really deep relationship with yourself.
Right. No, that's excellent advice. Final question, and this isn't my own question. I listen to Lewis Howes. He has a podcast called The School of Greatness. And at the end, he asks every guest, it's called 3 Things. So if you only had 3 things that you could tell the world, you know, all of your books and your journal articles and everything is gone. So you just have 3 things that you can tell people. What would those 3 things be? And I know that's kind of a big question, but I'm curious.
Wow. Well, I think that there's one for me, which I really, really struggle with in this world of ours. And that is that we have an unconscious. We have parts of ourselves that we defend against. And it's okay to know that. And in fact, anxiety and agitation is the red flag for that. And people don't know that. They think they know themselves. If you know what you're feeling, you know yourself. But in fact, knowing what you're feeling is just the tip of the iceberg. If you follow that and you pay attention to it, you're going to find yourself in an amazing underground labyrinth. So I guess the 3 things for me, and what I devote my life to, and what I'm an advocate for, is 1, we have parts of our brain that are automatic, that we don't understand and know. 2, getting to know them is an incredibly rich journey. Ooh, so rich, so fascinating. And 3, it takes you to new places.
Absolutely. Now, Claudia, for people who are interested in learning more about therapy, or they would like to connect with you online, where can we find you?
Well, I'm at claudialuiz.com. Anybody, I'm on Instagram at Claudia Luiz, Luiz, and I post a lot of snippets from my book. That's kind of new. That's how you and I reconnected. So I'm really loving it right now. And I have a little quiz on my website, Find Your Wobble. I call this a wobble, the difficult feelings, and I explain why. So people can go and look at their wobble and connect with me there and find support with me over the internet. Let's see, I've got my website, I've got Instagram, and I'm on Facebook.
Okay. And for those of you who like to read like I do, I'm a bookworm. Here is Claudia's book, The Making of a Psychoanalyst. Please buy local and order it for yourself. Claudia, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you talking with us about hyperhidrosis and mental health.
Thank you, Maria. It's wonderful to see you.